If you or a family member have been hurt because of the careless actions of another person, call Walker Texas Lawyer. They'll work to get you the financial compensation and justice you deserve. They have 40 years of experience, and you don't pay unless you win. Call 713-881-9653 today for a consultation or go to walkertexaslawyer.com.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
Broadcasting live from Houston, Texas, and around the world. TV host, best-selling author, and radio personality Brad Gilmore brings you a collection of conversations with stars from movies.
Mark Wahlberg.
Hey, how are you?
The legendary Mr. Christopher Lloyd. Christopher, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. Great introduction.
Television.
Jimmy Fallon joins us this morning. Jimmy, how you doing, my friend?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Brad, for having me. I appreciate this, bud.
Kelly Ripa.
Brad, thank you for having me.
Comedy.
Jay Leno joins us. Jay, how you doing?
Hey, Brad, what's going on?
Gabriel Fluffy Iglesias.
Good morning.
Music.
Lola Monroe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The legendary frontman of AC/DC, Brian Johnson, joins us right now. Brian, how you doing?
Good morning, Brad. What looking to talk, you me funny lad.
Grammy Award winner Maya joins us.
How are you?
And more. This is The Collection. Now your host, The Boat, Brad Gilmore.
And we're so excited to have him on and to talk about him. I've been listening to nothing but this podcast, Class of 88 from Wondering Audible and Westbrook Media. And one of the writers from the series is also joining us right now. You might know him from Broken Cool, Adam Aziz. Adam, hey man, congrats on the podcast and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, brother. I appreciate you having me.
Look, this show, I was scrolling through YouTube and I happened to come across it on, I think it was Will Smith, who hosts the show. I think we should say. Yes. Will Smith, the host of Class of 88. I saw it on his YouTube channel and it said, episode 1 of Class of 88. So I started listening to it and I'm like, and they're at the DJ battle, the battle for world supremacy. And, it immediately captured me. And I listened to all of the episodes that were available, binged them. And then you and I were able to connect. So again, congrats on a great podcast. I'm sure the feedback's been nothing but phenomenal.
It has been awesome. It was a little tough to keep up with there in the beginning. I mean, it was when it kind of hit. It was 3 years in the making, which was pretty wild. And the feedback's been awesome. I think a lot of people, excited to go back and remember that time, dig back into the music. And I think just the stories that came out through the podcast, right? A lot of things. I mean, one cool one, even just like something small, but like when Jazzy Jeff was talking about Jam Master Jay teaching his son to walk on the Runs House tour, right? It's just these really cool memories that everyone involved with the show, got to share again. And it's been awesome. I think really good for everyone and good for hip hop too.
Yeah, I know this has been the year where we celebrate the 50 years of hip hop, but what the series really showed me is, yes, hip hop might have been around for 50 years. You can go back to 1520 Sedgwick with DJ Kool Herc back in the early 70s, getting everything going, and Grandmaster Flash and Africa Bambaataa, but it didn't take off for the longest time. I mean, that's a 15-year gap between where we credit the founding of hip hop to where your podcast starts in 1988. There's a lot of rap that happened in that time, but it wasn't, I guess, recognized on a mainstream level. Would you say that's fair?
I think so. I mean, I think that's what's cool about 88, right? Is you had a little bit of everything, right? So in the podcast, Will talks about how, when they were on tour, they were on tour with, Run DMC, they were on tour with, Public Enemy, and, they had their own kind of flavor, right? They skewed a little more towards the pop side of things. And then in that same year, you had P.E., who was like really like loud and out front. And then you had, Run DMC a little bit, sticking to the truer roots, of hip hop culture. But at the same time, one of the first artists to do true, sponsorship deals, like the one they did with Adidas. So 88 had so much in that year that sort of set the foundation for what was to come. And I think that's what makes it so compelling, to talk about.
Where does it all begin for you though? Like where's the hip hop journey for you begin? I mean, what was the first record that did it for you, or kind of where did the fascination start?
Well, it's interesting. Someone reached out to me on X the other day, who was a writer for another publication, and shared an article they did on the Fat Boys. And the Fat Boys were the first tape that I ever got, right? I was probably 6 years old, maybe, and, just like playing it to death, right? And so for me, it was like Fat Boys, DJ Jazzy Jeff, and Fresh Prince, which made it so, unbelievable in July 2020. I'm sort of chilling outside, messing with my phone, and an email comes in, that has the subject line, Will Smith podcast. I'm like, huh? So jump in there, and I'm like, shit, oh shoot, I should.
You're fine. You're fine.
My bad, brother.
You're good.
But it's like, wow, would you like to participate in this? And it was incredible, right? Because I just, I loved, Will and Jeff. When I was younger, parents just don't understand, Nightmare on My Street. So those are the foundations, for me into NWA, into Naughty by Nature and KRS-One. And, and what, has been awesome is I've been able to, quote unquote, like kind of stick around since then. So I've kind of gone through the different eras, right, where I've had favorites in all those different eras. So that's what's cool to see some of the, originators, kind of resurfacing because of the podcast, because of the 50th anniversary of hip hop. Many of those, artists too have been very active, since then, right? They may have not had that same, critical acclaim or commercial, success as they did back then, but like the likes of, Chuck D from Public Enemy, Chuck D never went away, right? Like, Chuck's was actually one of the first, hip hop artists to get involved with the internet, right? When that was kind of coming up, and so it's so cool to just see, that era, and the eras that followed, and, how everything wove into each other. It was, it was pretty, it was amazing to be part of. I mean, truly, that's the most I could kind of say about just the actual participation in it.
And I want to dive in more to the production side of the podcast in a second, but when you start talking about some of these names, so my wife's a realtor, and sometimes I'll go hang out with her on the weekend when she's got a bunch of errands, right? So we were driving around, and I was talking to her about the podcast and how much I loved it, and so I'm start playing her old school rap records,
right,
like just stuff that maybe she didn't hear. And I can't tell you how obsessed I was with Public Enemy, but mainly Chuck D's voice. I thought Chuck D, not only his voice from a political statement and the things that he was talking about, but like his rap voice. Like his rap voice was so. I would listen to Bring the Noise all the time and be like, corrupt like a senator, soul on a rope, but you treat it like soap on a rope. And I'm like, how does he do this? So awesome. And that's why Chuck and Flav, obviously with Public Enemy, but Chuck was always one of the MCs that I feel like today, still, I feel like he doesn't get enough love for as dope as he really, really was. And it was interesting to me in the podcast to find out that he really didn't he was like almost a reluctant star in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, think about Public Enemy and, the time that they came out, right. And the maturity scale that hip hop, was at the time from the acceptance and, popular culture and many of the things that the culture was still battling for, radio play, for video play, for space, on a record store rack. And then you have Public Enemy, who is so like brash and so out front. And that's what drew me to hip hop, back then, right? And I think it's something, unfortunately, that we have lost a little bit, is that hip hop was, for lack of a better term, dangerous back then, right? It was rebellious. It stood out, from the pack. And yeah, I mean, Chuck's voice, if you think about the iconic voices in hip hop, Chuck, Guru, Nas, Jay-Z, these are persistent through time, right? They never fade. Even in the case of Guru, rest in peace. He still persists over time, right? Because he said it's mostly the voice, right? Like that's that's those are the ones we remember, right? So I think and I think P.E. took a lot of chances, right, when they came out, right? They were coming out in a time when hip hop was still building, and they said kind of that wasn't important to them, right? They were going to do what they were going to do, irrespective of where the culture was at that time, from acceptance in the mainstream, which was made them so great.
And for me, I'm a Houston cat, right? I grew up here in Houston, Texas, and we have our own rich hip hop history here in the city. But I can make a direct line from Public Enemy to NWA to the Ghetto Boys, right? I feel like P.E. without them, there's this whole subgenre in hip hop of I wouldn't call them conscience. Like when you think of like a Q-Tip or a Common, but they were speaking to something more than maybe like LL was, and I love LL, but just a whole different vibe. LL's rapping about his radio or the girls that he's getting or what have you, the more braggadocio side, and then Chuck is coming through with these razor sharp, eloquent political speeches over a beat.
Yeah. Trace it further, right? That goes all the way to like a Dead Prez, right? Where, that's one of my favorite hip hop groups, some of my favorite hip hop songs. And you can just like, if you listen to Let's Get Free, you hear Public Enemy all the way through it, right? Everything from, social and politically charged lyrics, to lyrics around, health, something that, Chuck D is a big proponent of. That influence, has just like seeped through the culture, over time. And that's how we got some of the greatest artists. So, totally agree.
So you have this 88 year, and to me, when listening to the show does such a great job of giving you enough background about the performer and where they were at that point, like especially when y'all talk about Run DMC and where they were in their career when they're putting out Raising Hell and really taking it to the next level. But I didn't realize how many big moments happened in this 1 year when you talk about whether it is the Grammy Awards where it kind of ends in the show, or you talk about MTV Raps and these platinum singles or platinum albums that are coming out from these rappers.
Yeah.
When you're putting this show together, tell me kind of from a process standpoint, you're one of the writers on the show. How does this begin? You get the email that says Will Smith Podcast in the subject line. Where does it go from there?
Yeah. So after I gathered myself a little bit, we had those initial calls, and, one thing I actually did alongside, writing was, I also helped support the research side of the podcast as well, but then also produce those episode outlines. So I think back to your question, that's what made it so difficult, was so much stuff happened in that year. And there were so many artists that had such huge impact, over the course of that year, that it was really about, kind of doing those initial drafts of the outlines. And then unfortunately having to, cut out, some events, and some artists, unfortunately. One, group that I know came up, a lot, through the production of the podcast was Beastie Boys. And, I think that they, really didn't, get that, presence in the podcast. But obviously, again, talking about influence, that persisted through, hip hop, they're definitely one. But yeah, that's essentially was that first step, right? Is kind of refining those outlines to determine what artists and, what events, we really wanted to hone in on. And then from there, it was, starting to, write the actual script, record the interviews, and then start, kind of inserting, those audio clips as well. But I can tell you it was the most rewarding, thing I've ever worked on. And I've been in this, since the mid 90s. It was for sure the most challenging, as well. It was
because you
an
could have
enormous
done a
amount of work.
podcast about any one of the artists. You could have done
100%.
8 episodes on Rakim and Eric B. You could have done 8 episodes
Easy.
on Queen Latifah, or any of the people that are covered, especially Run DMC. You could do multiple seasons of a podcast on Run DMC and their story, or talking to Rick Rubin about the early years of Def Jam. And yeah, some things have to stay on the cutting room floor. But I will say this: when the podcast starts and it's the Battle of World Supremacy, okay, this was like I don't know if there was a lot of conversation of how we're going to start the show off, but this was the best way. Whatever other ideas there were had to how to start, they were inferior to starting at the Battle of World Supremacy, because it put you such in the moment to really still back when the DJ was the DJ. And I even remember in the hip hop scene in Houston, we had this nice little renaissance from like 2005 to 2012 ish. And there were a lot of beat battles. And I remember going to beat battles. And that's where my mind was transported to when I was listening to the Battle for World Supremacy, of back when the beats and the DJs were king.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you something really cool, about that episode that I haven't, shared a ton about yet is, as a writer across the podcast, that episode, I mean, kind of from top to bottom, I wrote the script for that one. And, what was so challenging about that was I was having, to essentially write how, Will and Jeff were feeling, when they were in those moments, right, at the Battle for World Supremacy. And it was so vivid. I think that's what you're, sort of sharing. And that's how it felt when we were putting it together as well, right? Like you felt like you were there as you're sort of writing through it. You felt like you were there, and it was just a wild kind of, experience in that way. And yeah, I agree. I mean, it was an awesome way to, kick off the podcast. I mean, that is my favorite episode, just because I think there's so many interesting sort of like nuggets of stories in there that may have not been, super well known previously. Like just that whole thing about, Will trying to cut off Jeff's cast when they're in London, recording the album. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I think across the podcast that, it was such a huge effort, so many people involved. And I think the one thing that stood out to me when I listened through to it was it's so vivid, right? Like it's hard to pull yourself away from it. And it's because you're talking to the people that were there, right? You're talking to Queen Latifah, you're talking to Rakim, Jeff, Red Alert, there's so many, Chuck D, they were there. Like they know when Chuck talks about, the Rikers, when they talk about the Rikers performance, it's like, you can feel the tension rising as you're listening, to the podcast, right? With the writer that sort of like kind of dined them out, about what their plans were, and everything. And it was, it turned out incredible.
I even loved in the Battle for Supremacy episode where Jeff's talking about putting WD-40 in the mixer so he could cut easier and do his fades. I mean, just it like you said, it painted a very vivid picture. So, what was your working relationship like with Will? Him being the host, you writing the episode. How does that really work? Do you just send him the script? Do y'all go over it together? What's the process there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no, I wasn't working directly with Will on it. I worked with a company called Awfully Nice, who is one of the producers on the show. And, the person that, runs Awfully Nice is incredibly talented dude, who's produced countless amazing, podcasts. So I'm trying to frame it up. I mean, it was a lot of meetings, a lot of reviews, and a lot of back and forth just so we could get that, that feeling right, because obviously the information is there, right? Like, to tell the story, of 88, it's been written about, we know who NWA are, we know who DJ Jazzy Jeff and the French Prince are. And that was the biggest challenge, right? Is how do you tell this story in a way that is going to provide people with, new perspective, new information about what happened and what it was like to be there. And as daunting of a task as that was, I think, we ended up doing that. So a lot of refinement. And that's why, I mean, the podcast literally took I think Westbrook, mentioned this in some of their social, posts about it as well, as it took 3 years to make, right? Because it was so important, to get right.
Yeah, you had to get it right. And as somebody who like I knew a lot, I knew a lot of these stories, especially when you're talking with Rick Rubin and DMC about putting together Walk This Way and stuff like that. I mean, DMC, again, great storyteller when you listen to how he frames stuff up in the podcast and goes through it. And he's like, oh yeah, I know this record. This is track 4 on the Toys album. And that's actually something I had never heard before. Like the DJs would scratch their names off the record. So, to keep that private for them. DMC is such a cool guy. I had the privilege of interviewing him one time and I did, and I in person. And I'll never forget this because I'm such a rap nerd. After the interview was over, he was in Houston for like a convention or something, and he needed a ride back to his hotel. And so I was like, hey, man, I'll give you a ride back to the room. And I think I maybe intentionally took a long route so that we could just talk about old school hip hop, and we're rapping like old verses to each other.
Wow.
And just talking about it, just a great moment. But
that's
one of the moments that stood out to me that I'd never heard before was the story with Roxanne Shante and Curtis Blow, and how Curtis gave her a 4 when everyone else was giving her 10s and high scores, and then saying, I did it for the future of hip hop. Whoa, that was like an incredible story.
I agree. I mean, that is one that, stood out to me, too. And then just how, years later, they sort of connected and, but just hearing about how much that affected, her. And I agree. That was a standout. I also thought a standout was, DMC talking about Walk This Way. And I just couldn't stop laughing about when he first heard, the record, and he was like, you guys trying to like kill our career? Like, what do you, what are you doing to us here? And, you can imagine, right? Like at the time, I mean, the blending of genres is not, what it is today, where everything is sort of like, gray, like everything's mashed together, right? Back then, hard line separation, especially with hip hop and other, musical genres. So to hear like, DMC talk about how they felt about that, I mean, you could imagine some dudes like seeing, Steven Tyler and those guys, and it's like, I'm not doing this.
I'm not doing this. And then it turns into this massive record that was also a metaphorical, a literal and a metaphorical breaking down of certain barriers between hip hop and the mainstream. And even for, Fab Five Freddy and Yo MTV Raps to put Boogie Down Productions at the end of the first episode to have My Philosophy as the end. I didn't know that. That was something I didn't know. And I'm actually shocked to hear that. I mean, that took a set, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that stood out to me just around, Yo MTV Raps was, just how Ralph McDaniels, and Video Music Box really, really created the foundation for that, and how, Ralph McDaniels actually had, meetings, with MTV, and, many times, companies want to sort of create it themselves. So I think that was, partly why, Ralph wasn't the guy, but even still, that was groundbreaking, just because if you think about, that time, like a lot of the things we talked about around the podcast, it just wasn't, the culture was not mature at that time. Right. So to have something like that in 88, when you think about it now, is unbelievable, kind of, in a sense, right? To have a platform like that on a major network, for music and culture that was still, growing, and still had so many forces working against it, was pretty amazing.
Now you work on this thing for 3 years, and really trying to hone it in and tell a story from beginning, middle, and end that's going to resonate and connect with people. When it started to finish and you knew it was coming out, what were the thoughts going through your head where you're like, is anybody going to listen to this? Do people going to like it? Like, what are you thinking?
I mean, I didn't know it was coming out, to be honest, until probably 3 weeks before I shouldn't say that, probably about 4 to 6 weeks before it happened. I mean, just because it had been in development, so long, and I had stayed sort of connected to it. And when I found out it was actually coming out, I knew people, would love it and listen to it for a few reasons. I mean, one is, Will's connection to hip hop is something that I think people like really cherish. People that love hip hop culture and love him, like really love that time. And I think they're hungry for him to like invest, time back into it. So that was one reason, why. And then the other, just simply is because all of the talented people, that worked on this, I knew what was being, created and how good it was. So I was, super excited, but really confident that, people would appreciate it and feel like, it did the culture in the year justice.
It's interesting you bring that up about Will, because with Will, so many people, automatically they think of him as the actor, and so they should. I mean, he's had an incredible career as an actor, second to none, really. But I love hearing him talk about hip hop, because I feel as though, although yes, we know he came from the rap game, and we know he came up as the Fresh Prince, it has been so long, and he hasn't been active in the culture, at a consistent basis in so long. To hear him talk about really DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince being the building blocks to bring hip hop to the mainstream and winning a Grammy. And you think about this whole career he had and could have continued. I mean, Will could have continued in hip hop and never gone into acting and still be talked about with the same reverence that we talk about him today.
Absolutely. I mean, you can hear it in the podcast, right? Or if you watch the clips, of the interviews, the excitement, that comes out, from him when he's talking about that time, talking about hip hop. I mean, it feels a little different, right? And it's because that was the foundation, right? And the thing that people forget, and actually I should mention the thing that actually led me, to being involved in the podcast is in 1989, Will, and Jeff, instituted a Grammy boycott, right? Because, rap and the rap awards weren't being respected, on the broadcast, and they boycotted, right? And that stand that they took, and I wrote about it. I wrote about it for Anscape at the time. It was The Undefeated. That's actually, how I kind of ended up, being involved, is, they forget, like, they really took a stand, right? And they were, popular artists at the time, right? So they were kind of leading, the culture in that sense, to where, it's funny how things connect to where we see today. I think, Grammys still have a ways to go, but, them having this, Grammy tribute to hip hop that's actually airing, in December on CBS, is a long way from, hey, we're not gonna give any credit, to the rap awards, and we're not going to give it any shine. You just see, like, had they not done that and not pushed, we may not be where we are now.
Yeah. And to think about where not only the culture was, but just to think, man, wouldn't you have loved to have been a hanger-on during that tour of the Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff and Public Enemy, and then Run DMC and Salt and Peppa, and to be around just to soak up that energy, because it was on fire, and they were all creating hip hop, but they were creating their hip hop and their spin on it and their take on it. And it showed how vibrant the genre really was when you have Queen Latifah going out and making a song like UNITY, or singing on the records, as you point out in the podcast, singing on songs, making more melody, bringing some reggae influence here, and bringing this and bringing that, and the melding of hip hop and rock. It's just, God, I wish I would have been in those rooms.
Well, you're so right. And I mean, I think that's why they say it's arguably, hip hop's most important year, right? Is because all of these things that we see today, right? Whether you're talking about, the melodic nature, of some of those songs, the, reggae influence into hip hop, the rock kind of collision there, all of these things, at some point along the way, and even today, happened, right? And it was really that year that created the foundation for all of this. And that's why, nothing else, so many things happened, in that 1 year, right? And that's why when we get to the NWA episode, it's like all of this stuff's happening, on the East Coast. Oh yeah, by the way, the
NWA is coming around too at the same time.
It's just unbelievable to think that all happened in a single year.
It is wild, man. Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you know what? I feel like you have to be put on the spot as a rap historian that you are. I need to know, what is Adam's top 5? Who's in your top 5, man? All
top
time.
5 MCs?
Top 5 MCs all time.
Oh boy.
Obviously it can change at any moment, but
okay. Maybe I won't do it in order.
Just 5 guys.
Yeah. So most definitely Hove. I would say Nas. I think I have to say KRS-One. Wow. I have to say Biggie.
Mm-hmm.
And
got one more spot there, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd have to I think it's hard not to say Rakim.
Yeah. Yeah, Rakim.
That's a pretty good top 5. That's
a great top 5, actually. That's a great top 5, to be honest with you. And to have Rakim in there, and I love always hearing Rakim talk about hip hop and talk in this podcast and in any, when he's talking about even the way that he would write his rhymes. And I think I remember seeing him talk about, he'd have the paper and he'd number them off to know how many bars he would write. And he was just took a mathematical approach to it. Or when he talked about, the 7 MCs story that he tells in the podcast was off the charts. But I wanted to ask you this. The DJ, as I alluded to earlier, used to be, everything was about the DJ. I mean, right. Even the essence and the beginnings of hip hop were the MCs bigging up the DJ. Check out the DJ. Yep. I'm here to show you the DJ. It's all about him. And then it starts to make that turn. You could say in the late 80s, but really into the 90s, the DJ kind of goes by the wayside. And then today, when people think of DJs, they just think of maybe someone at an EDM festival or Tiesto, not someone really, cutting. And there's not even really cuts on records anymore. I mean, if it's there, it's rare.
Unless it's Premier producing, it's
right. Then you have to, or it's not a real record. Yeah. But I remember you say the Premier. There was a record that he produced, I think, on Watch the Throne or on the deluxe version. That was it the Joy? There was something that he had that had some cool cuts on it. I don't know if that was Premier or not, but why do you think that this de-emphasis of the DJ occurred?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I just did an interview with Mr. C, and I asked him, by the way, Mr. C told me that he has in his possession an entire album's worth of unreleased Biggie from the Ready to Die and Life After Death sessions. And he said Diddy should holler at him. So I just thought I'd get that message out because I'd like Diddy to holler at him.
Diddy, come on, brother love. Let's make this happen.
That's what I'm saying.
Let's make this happen.
That's what I'm saying. But I asked Mr. C, I said, why did you gravitate towards DJing? Did you ever want to be an MC? He's like, nah, I just love being, a DJ. So I think where it changed quite simply is just how, how labels marketed, artists, right? I mean, if you think about the early days of hip hop, it was, Guru and Premier, right? And there were DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. You'd always have, Scratch with EPMD. You because of the way they were presented, you would know the DJ, right? You would know who they were. They had an importance in the production of the record. They were present in the video. It was just the way that the music and the visuals were presented. And then, to your point, it just started, fading, I think, just simply because, I think the vibrancy maybe of the front man or the solo artist, became, more prominent. And it's true, right? I mean, you think about late 90s, into the mid 90s and 2000s, we started getting some very iconic, solo artists, and whether it be like Busta Rhymes or everybody from Wu-Tang, or it was just it's just that's kind of what we started seeing, right? And I think in some way it's just started fading to the background, and then the only way the DJ really still preserved itself is if you were like a DJ Premier, right, where you're one of the most iconic producers, and people still connect to you in that way, but not so much like from a 2 turntables and a mic kind of way.
DJ Premier, by the way, a native Houstonian. I just have to throw that out there. Any chance I can get. And you're right. It's not even just the DJ, but the hip hop group is almost a thing of a generation, of bygone generation. And there's still some, but not to the level of like in the 88. It's like, hey, name a hip hop group: Run DMC, NWA, Public Enemy, Salt and Pepper. Like, it's all there. I mean, there's a ton of Beastie Boys. And it's not like that anymore. And I don't know if that's just where the medium has taken it or what have you. But, I love the good hip hop group.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you're right. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think they still, definitely exist, but not from, the artists definitely that we see at the, sort of the forefront of things. That's for sure.
The beginning of the podcast starts with the battle for world supremacy. And then at the end, there was this great moment between Will, Jeff, and Jaden, where Jaden tells the story of Watch the Throne dropping.
Yeah.
And Will telling him to get in the car. And then he's like, Dad, where we're going? And he's like, I don't know. We're just listening to this album. And I actually remember waiting for Watch the Throne to drop at midnight and going in my car and driving around my neighborhood listening to Watch the Throne. What was an album like that for you?
I mean, the one that comes to mind, because I just mentioned it, was, Life After Death. Right. And just like, sitting, with it and opening the liner notes and, seeing the production credits and, just like, Biggie's impact in such a confined space of time is just like unbelievable, right? When you think about how much time he was actually truly active, significantly less time than Tupac was truly active, right? And still today, right? One of the biggest artists in the world, right? Still iconic, and so that's one that stands out. And then also probably, Wu-Tang Forever, as well, kind of, cutting class and, going to the mall to pick it up. And, it's just, these are, and that's one thing I'd written about this for, I think it was for Grammy, the Grammy.com, but, that excitement is really gone. That's one thing that is really missing and I think this is actually a true challenge that the music industry has now, right? Is that, well, the ease of consuming music has never been easier. The value has never been more devalued, and there's no real true excitement, right? Like, as an example, like, Ross and Meek Mill dropped a collab album today, right? That's pretty like significant. By next Wednesday, right? Unfortunately, and it's, from what I've heard, it sounds, super dope, but by next Wednesday, we'll be on to something else, right? And people don't like connect with it anymore that way. And that's just a reality of things. But that's why I think, 88, when you look back and you think about the albums that came out during that time, that's why they have stood the test of time. And that's why these artists, like Public Enemy as an example, that's why Public Enemy can still tour and, sell out shows and can tour whenever they want. And so many examples of artists like that. It's because people connected with them at a time when there was still the connection, to the music, right? And that's a real challenge, for artists, artists today, for sure.
Yeah, you're right. There isn't that. I even remember going back to was it 07 when 50 and Kanye had their big clash. They're releasing on the same day. I think it was September the 11th, 2007 was when they dropped Curtis and Graduation, and the build for that and the excitement. And I remember getting both albums and texting my buddy like, man, which one do you think's harder? I don't know, this one, going back and forth on tracks and bars. That is
the answer is Graduation.
The answer is Graduation. That is the correct answer. Graduation's a near flawless album. And Curtis was good. I just saw 50 in Houston when he was here for his tour. And it was great. And you forget how many hits he has. Curtis was good, but it wasn't like those first two albums. Those first two 50 albums, especially Get Rich or Die Trying, are just unbelievable how incredible that first album was. Unbelievable.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. That is another, really good example of probably a late stage excitement that was, created. I mean, the only time we really get it now, to be honest, is when Hove drops, right? And
there's a couple, right? Like maybe Jay, Kendrick probably will command that kind of attention.
Yeah, that's true.
But Jay more so. 444, when it dropped, it was, I'm not waiting till tomorrow. I'm listening to it tonight.
And it's just unbelievable. I mean, I know people have been talking about it a lot lately because I think it was the anniversary of American Gangster, and I think the anniversary of Black Album's, coming up. But for me, like 444, that's in my top 3, believe it or not, Jay albums.
Me too.
Now, and I can't believe he made that album at that age and stage of his career. Like it is just again, it just shows you the separation, right, between, these iconic, artists and MCs. So yeah, I mean, next time Hove drops, I mean, I'm going to be super, super amped, and excited, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare these days.
The 444 was Jay-Z, in my opinion, in his most artful and being in tune with his artistry. Where you look at the volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, he's showing off his rapping ability, right, at a very high level. And then in, Black Album, he shows, okay, I can create great songs that sound good, that make you feel a certain way. But by the time he got to 444, he goes, I'm showing you that I'm an artist. I'm the same as anybody else. And I'm not talking just even musically. I'm talking about I'm at a Spielberg director level of storytelling. I'm at a Picasso level of artistry. I'm showing you that I can encompass all parts of what makes a great creative work. And that's what 444 was for me. I mean, even when you listen to songs like Moonlight or Smile, or you're like, whoa, how is he making this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really kind of what it is, right? Like, how is he making this? Especially when we know how Jay makes records, right? Which is kind of unbelievable into itself, right? That you could come up with the creativity around the flows and the lyrics, off the dome for all intensive purposes, and then just spit it in the booth, right? Is sort of unmatched, right? So, I mean, hopefully we can kind of generate that excitement again soon.
Hopefully so, man. Well, I've taken up enough of your time, Adam. I really appreciate the conversation. Class of 88 is a podcast that everybody needs to stop what they're doing right now. After they finish this interview, go jump into it. If you didn't listen to it before, you have to check out Class of 88. Where can people find you? Where can they follow you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, man, at Broken Cool on socials, brokencool.com. And appreciate it, brother. Great to connect.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it, Adam. Adam, as is everybody. Class of 88, brokencool.com. Really appreciate it, man.
Hurry up, tape running out.